When Fernando Mendoza decided not to throw at the 2025 NFL Combine, the reaction across sports media was immediate and loud. That decision, on its own, is not unusual. Patrick Mahomes skipped combine throws in 2017. Kyler Murray did the same in 2019. Quarterbacks opting to showcase their arm in the controlled environment of a pro day is a calculated, strategic move that scouts and coaches across the league fully understand. And yet, the volume of the reaction to Mendoza's decision felt different, sharper, more urgent, more loaded with implication. That reaction is worth examining closely, not because it reveals something about Mendoza's readiness, but because of what happens when you place it directly beside the coverage Shedeur Sanders received for making similar decisions during his own draft process. This is not an argument about which quarterback is more talented. That debate belongs on a different stage. What belongs here is a close look at the language used, the tone applied, and the assumptions made, because when you line them up side by side, a pattern begins to emerge that goes well beyond football. Shedeur Sanders entered his draft cycle after one of the most statistically productive quarterback careers in Colorado Buffalo's history. In 2024, he completed 74% of his passes for 4,134 yards, threw 37 touchdowns against just 10 interceptions, and did so behind one of the worst offensive lines in college football. He finished as a Heisman Trophy finalist. He entered the pre-draft process as a consensus top 5 quarterback prospect. And then, the narrative shifted, not because his production changed, but because the framing around him did. Coverage of Sanders began emphasizing things that had little to do with what he did on the field. His confidence was described as arrogance. His media presence was labeled selfishness. His development at Colorado under his father, Deion Sanders, was packaged as controversy rather than context. Before a single stopwatch was clicked at the combine or a single route was run at pro day, the tone of coverage had already tilted. Source: multiple pre-draft media reports, January-April 2025. Now compare that to Mendoza. His story was told through an entirely different set of words. He was called resilient. He was described as having high character. Analysts said he did it the right way. His background was treated as a feel-good narrative, and it is a compelling story, genuinely. But notice what those words do: they preload evaluation with approval. They set up a conclusion before the evidence is fully reviewed. Meanwhile, Sanders walked into pre-draft media coverage preloaded with skepticism, not evidence-based skepticism, but tone-based skepticism. That distinction matters enormously when we talk about how careers are shaped before they even begin. When you compare the production numbers directly, the narrative gap becomes even more difficult to justify. Shedeur Sanders posted a 74% completion rate in 2024, which ranked among the highest in major college football. He threw for over 4,100 yards in a single season and finished his college career with 94 touchdown passes against 24 interceptions across 2 seasons at Colorado. Fernando Mendoza posted strong numbers at California as well. He is a legitimate prospect with real arm talent and a clean decision-making profile. But when you place the production side by side, the difference in coverage tone does not reflect the difference in output. Source: NCAA and ESPN Statistical Records, 2023 to 2024 seasons. Heisman voting and pre-draft projection rankings shape public perception in ways that outlast the actual analysis. Sanders was a Heisman finalist, yet his draft stock began to slide in a way that was accompanied not by hard evaluations but by vague characterizations. See it and throw it was established as the gold standard for quarterback readiness, and Shedeur Sanders demonstrated exactly that skill at one of the highest completion percentages in college football. So the question that deserves a real answer is, if that is the standard, why isn't it being applied with the same consistency to every prospect on the board? Part of the answer lies in a single last name, Sanders. The name Deion Sanders carries massive cultural weight in American sports. It carries fame, it carries opinion, and it carries assumption. When Shedeur Sanders entered the draft process, he did not enter as an anonymous prospect, he entered with the full weight of public assumption already attached. That assumption ran in both directions. Some people expected him to succeed because of the name. Far more, it turned out, were ready to scrutinize because of it. Media coverage of his draft slide rumors did not treat the story as speculation. It treated vague reports as near-confirmed reality. Anonymous sourcing became a vehicle for criticism that could not be directly challenged because the sources could not be identified. Source: NFL Network and various national media outlets, February-April 2025. Phrases like "a coach felt" or "sources close to the process said" floated through broadcast segments and social media takes without any mechanism for accountability. Shedeur Sanders could not respond to a criticism that had no named author. He could not disprove an allegation that was never specific enough to be falsifiable. That is not journalism, that is narrative fog. And it stuck. The 48-hour media cycle in today's NFL coverage environment accelerates this problem. A vague report lands, gets amplified across platforms, generates takes and response takes, and by the time any fact-checking could occur, the next story has already buried it. The damage is done and the correction, if one ever comes, never travels as far as the original claim. Source: Media Criticism Studies on Sports Journalism Cycles, 2022 to 2024. This pattern is not limited to the draft. It runs through the entire coverage structure of the NFL. Consider Josh Allen. In the 2023 AFC Divisional Round, Allen threw 3 interceptions against the Kansas City Chiefs, a postseason performance that by any objective measure was not good. The coverage response was measured. Analysts noted his effort. They talked about how much he cared. They said he would learn from it. Mistakes were framed as evidence of passion, not evidence of limitation. The narrative remained fundamentally supportive even in moments of clear on-field failure. Source: ESPN, NFL Network post-game coverage, January 2024. Now consider Lamar Jackson. Jackson has won 2 NFL MVP awards, in 2019 and 2023, and by conventional and advanced metrics, is one of the most productive quarterbacks in league history. And yet, for years, his coverage was undercut by questions about whether his style would translate, whether he could perform in the postseason, and whether he had the temperament to lead a team through adversity. His 2019 MVP season, in which he threw for 36 touchdowns and rushed for 1,206 yards, was followed by postseason scrutiny that was qualitatively different from the scrutiny applied to quarterbacks with fewer accomplishments. The questioning of his toughness was not grounded in evidence. It was grounded in assumption. Source: Pro Football Reference, NFL Historical Records. The difference in tone between how Allen's struggles are covered and how Jackson's accomplishments are still sometimes questioned is not explained by production. It is explained by something the statistics do not capture, a difference in the default posture of coverage. Press conference framing reveals this default posture more clearly than almost anything else. Pay attention the next time a black quarterback and a white quarterback are asked about the same type of performance. Notice what is emphasized. Notice whether the question is about leadership or mechanics. Notice whether the word used is extension play or improvisation. Notice whether confidence is called confidence or called something else entirely. These are not always conscious choices by individual reporters, but the pattern across coverage is consistent enough to demand analysis. Source: Academic Research on Race and Sports Media Framing, Journal of Sports Media, 2019 to 2023. Grace, in the context of sports media, functions as the benefit of the doubt. It is the unspoken decision to frame a failure as a learning moment rather than a verdict. It is what separates a redemption arc from an indictment arc. It is the difference between growing pains and proof is not the guy. Grace is not formally distributed, there is no policy document, no editorial meeting where it is officially assigned. But the results of its distribution are visible in the record. Some quarterbacks receive patience as a default. Some receive pressure as a default. And those defaults are not randomized. Source: Content Analysis of NFL Quarterback Coverage, 2015 to 2024. Who gets second chances in public framing? Who gets labeled permanently after one difficult season? Who gets their worst game described as passion and whose worst game becomes evidence of a character flaw? These are not abstract philosophical questions. They have concrete answers when you go back through the archive of coverage and read what was actually written and said. This matters beyond the draft board because draft narratives have real financial consequences. Where a quarterback is selected affects their rookie contract. It affects their endorsement market before they take a single professional snap. It affects locker room perception, how teammates and coaching staffs receive them based on what they've already absorbed from media coverage. It affects the patience extended by front offices when early struggles occur. A quarterback drafted with a high character, resilient narrative enters the building with goodwill already in the bank. A quarterback who entered the building already labeled as an arrogant or a distraction starts with a deficit that has nothing to do with his arm strength or football IQ. Source: NFL Contract and Endorsement Data, Spotrac and Forbes, 2020 to 2025. Shedeur Sanders is a professional now. His career will be determined ultimately by what he does on the field, by reads made, passes thrown, fourth quarters navigated. But the framing that preceded his arrival in the NFL was not neutral. It was not purely football-based. And it will take longer to undo than it took to establish. This is not an attack on Fernando Mendoza. He did not manufacture his coverage. He did not write the headlines or produce the segments. He is a quarterback preparing to compete in the NFL, and his talent is real. Analyzing the pattern of coverage is not the same as criticizing the subject of positive coverage. The issue is systemic, it lives in editorial decisions, word choices, and the assumptions that inform both, not in the individual athletes who happen to be caught in the contrast. The real question at the center of all of this is not who is the better quarterback. It is not who deserves to be drafted first. The question is whether the same standards are being applied with the same consistency to players who occupy the same position, face the same pressure, and perform at comparable levels. The evidence suggests they are not. Same position. Same pressure. Different grace. Pay attention to the language used in the next quarterback story you consume. Notice how a mistake is described. Notice whether the reporter's default posture is curiosity or conclusion. Track who receives redemption narratives after failure and who receives permanent labels. Notice when outrage is selective and when forgiveness appears on a predictable schedule. These patterns are not invisible, they become visible the moment you decide to look for them. If you made it this far, you already know this was never just a quarterback debate. It was an examination of how football stories get told and who gets to be the hero of their own story before the season even starts. If you want more breakdowns that go past the surface and into the real framing behind NFL narratives, like this video, drop your take in the comments below, and subscribe to stay with us, because we are breaking down every angle, every leak, and every hidden play behind the headlines, every single week.